Why did the night feel alive, even after the guns had gone silent? The sandstorm had passed, but the wind still howled through the shattered of eastern Afghanistan, carrying with it the metallic scent of blood and cordite. The world seemed drained of color, brown dust, gray smoke, and red earth blurred together until even the horizon looked tired of war. Petty Officer Daniel Cross moved through it like a ghost, one hand on his rifle, the other clutching a trauma kit that was running out of miracles. His team, SEAL Unit 9, had been ambushed just before dusk. What should have been a clean extraction turned into a brutal firefight that lasted hours. Now the dead lay where they'd fallen, and the wounded prayed the birds in the sky were friendly. Daniel was a medic, but that title felt almost cruel tonight. He'd patched up 4 men, stabilized 2, and lost one whose pulse simply faded beneath his trembling hands. There wasn't time to mourn. There never was. He had to keep moving. "Cross, area's clear," came a voice over comms, rasped, exhausted. He didn't answer right away. His boots sank into loose sand as he scanned the horizon through his NVGs. The dust danced like ghosts in his vision, the landscape breathing in and out with the storm. Then a sound, so faint he almost thought it was the wind. Not gunfire, not metal, a breath. He froze, pivoted, listened. There again. A ragged exhale, human close. He moved toward it, rifle raised, each step deliberate. The beam of his infrared lens swept over shattered crates, a burnt-out Humvee, and finally a body. Someone was half buried beneath debris a few feet from the wreckage line. Heat signature small but steady. Alive. Possible survivor, Daniel whispered into his mic, already kneeling. His gloved hands brushed away sand and twisted metal until he uncovered the shape of a person. He expected to see a local fighter, maybe one of the insurgents who hadn't made it out. But what he saw instead stopped him cold. It was a woman. Her uniform was dust-stained, torn, and blood-soaked, but not American issue. Not Taliban, not ANA either. Her fatigues were desert tan with faded insignia, but the patch over her heart made his pulse skip. A white falcon wrapped around a red cross, embroidered perfectly, precise, almost ceremonial. Daniel had seen thousands of patches, hundreds of symbols, but this one hit something deep, old, familiar. He couldn't explain it, but it tugged at a place in him he hadn't visited since childhood. He reached for her wrist, weak pulse but there. "Stay with me," he murmured. "Come on, you're gonna make it." Her eyelids fluttered, gray eyes opening just enough for him to see the light still inside them. She tried to speak, but the words came out as a whisper scraped raw by pain. "You SEAL?" "Yeah," he said. "Medic, you're safe now." Her lips trembled. "No one's safe here." And then she went still. He caught her before she slumped, pressing gauze against the wound on her side. The blood was dark, arterial, bad, but not hopeless. He moved fast, wrapping, tightening, sealing. Every motion automatic, trained, rehearsed, but his mind was elsewhere on that emblem. White Falcon, Red Cross. He could see it clearly now, even in the dim light. It wasn't military, it wasn't mercenary, it looked like something older, something sacred. And then a memory hit him, a photograph tucked inside his father's old Bible. His father, Navy corpsman, long retired, had once shown him that picture of a field medic wearing that exact same symbol. Angels in boots, he'd called them. Falcon Cross, the ones who stayed when everyone else ran. He shook the thought away. There wasn't time for ghosts. The chopper roared overhead 10 minutes later, rotor wash kicking up walls of dust. Daniel and 2 crewmen loaded her onto the stretcher. Her body jerked with every blast of wind, blood seeping through fresh bandages. Daniel sat beside her the entire flight back, one hand pressed against her side, the other holding onto the rails like the world might fall apart if he let go. Every time he looked down at her, that emblem stared back. He couldn't stop thinking about it, about why she was here alone in the middle of an enemy stronghold, about how that emblem, a memory from his father's past, found its way into his present. Back at the forward operating base, the world was all fluorescent lights and metallic echoes. The field hospital smelled of iodine and fear. Daniel followed the stretcher until the surgeons took over, disappearing behind a curtain of white and stainless steel. "Cross, you're done for the night," one of the nurses said, voice tight but kind. "You look half dead yourself." He didn't answer. He just stood there staring at the crimson trail they left behind. Then he walked outside, leaned against the wall, and took his first breath in hours. The dawn light broke weakly over the horizon, coloring the sand in shades of ash and rose. Somewhere, the muezzin's call echoed across the valley, distant, hollow, almost gentle. He thought of the woman again, her words, "No one's safe here." When the cove finally called him in, Daniel stood at attention, though his legs felt like stone. The commander's voice was low, roughened by fatigue. "That woman you brought in, she's not Taliban, not ANA, not CIA either. We're running her prints, but so far nothing. No ID, no records, no match." Daniel frowned. "Then who the hell is she?" The commander leaned forward, rubbing his temples. "Intel thinks she might belong to an old NATO humanitarian outfit, called themselves Falcon Cross. Ever heard of them?" The words hit Daniel like shrapnel. He remembered his father's stories, about medics who carried no weapons, only courage, about how they went into where even soldiers refused to go. "They were wiped out," Daniel said quietly. "Kosovo, years ago." The commander's eyes lifted, all except one. Daniel felt something stir in his chest, part disbelief, part dread. "You sound sure of that," the commander added. "My father served with them," Daniel said. "He told me one woman survived, but no one ever found her." Silence fell between them. Outside, a helicopter blade spun lazily in the wind. "Get some rest, Cross," the commander said finally. "You did good out there." But rest never came. That night, Daniel sat alone in the dim light of the medic tent. His hands were still stained with her blood, the faint red lines on his gloves a reminder that someone's life still hung in the balance. He cleaned his instruments mechanically, humming an old Navy hymn his father used to sing. Then footsteps. Soft, hesitant. "Medic." He turned. She was awake. Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. Her gray eyes opened fully now, sharp and knowing. "You're safe," he said quickly, stepping closer. "You're at our base. You were hit bad, but you're stable." Her gaze drifted to the patch on his arm, the red cross of the SEAL Medic Division. "You carry the same cross," she murmured. He looked down, confused. Only now did he notice the resemblance, his red cross mirroring hers, except hers was framed by that white falcon. "Falcon Cross," he said slowly, "that's your unit." She hesitated, then nodded weakly. "Was," she whispered, "before they erased us." Her breath shook. Her eyes filled with something that wasn't just pain, it was grief. "They sent us to deliver aid, food, medicine, to children in a valley no one wanted to claim. When it went wrong, when the shelling started, they said we broke protocol, said we went rogue, but we stayed to save them. They left us to die." Daniel listened in silence. Her words came like broken glass, sharp, fragile, real. He'd seen soldiers cry before, but this was different. There was no fear in her voice, only the exhaustion of someone who'd carried too many ghosts for too long. "What's your name?" he asked softly. Her lips parted. "Captain Rains, Falcon Cross Medical Corps." The name struck him harder than any bullet. He'd heard it before in his father's stories late at night, when the old man would stare at the fire and speak of heroes who healed instead of killed. "Rains," he'd said once, "the angel who stayed behind." Daniel swallowed hard. "My father, he served with you." She blinked, confused. "Who was he?" "James Cross, Corpsman, Kosovo, 1999. Her eyes softened, a faint smile flickering through the pain. "Doc Cross, he was the first to call me Doc Falcon. said one day his son would wear the cross too. Daniel felt something collapse inside him, something he hadn't realized was still standing. He talked about you, he said quietly, said you were the bravest medic he ever met. His gaze drifted toward the tent's ceiling. He lied, she said, voice trembling with the ghost of a smile. I just refused to leave. For a long moment, neither spoke. The war outside faded to a distant hum. In the stillness, Daniel felt the strange weight of legacy, of generations of healers who carried the same burden, bleeding quietly so others could live. He didn't know it yet, but this night, this meeting would change everything. Because sometimes, the people who appear out of nowhere carry the stories we were always meant to finish. And Daniel Cross, son of a medic, soldier of silence, had just found the ghost his father left behind. How could silence be louder than gunfire? For days the camp moved as if holding its breath. Engines murmured, helicopters rose and fell. Men laughed in short bursts that died too quickly. But in the corner of the medic tent, a single cot seemed to draw every echo to itself. That's where Rains lay, drifting between pain and fever while Daniel Cross kept his quiet vigil. He came every night after debriefs. He'd drop his rifle by the door, wash the grit from his hands, and sit by her bedside. Sometimes he spoke, telling stories about nothing, bad rations, broken radios, the dumb joke the sniper told that morning. Sometimes he said nothing at all. He just listened to her breathe as if afraid the rhythm might stop. The others noticed. "Cross, you gone soft for your patient," one of the gunners teased. He smiled without humor. "She's not just a patient." "Then what is she?" He didn't answer. How could he explain that the woman on that cot was a piece of history, a living ghost of his father's stories? Each time woke she asked about the field, how many were hurt, who made it back, who didn't. She never asked about herself. Her mind was wired for others. Even half awake, she was still a medic, still carrying the same cross. One night when the generator hummed low and the desert wind rattled the tent, Daniel found her sitting upright, wrapped in a blanket. Her skin was pale, her lips cracked, but her eyes, those steel-gray eyes, were alive. "You shouldn't be up," he said. She gave a weak laugh. "Shouldn't be alive either. Guess rules don't stick to me." He crouched beside her, checking the dressings. The wound had started to knit. His hands were gentle, but she flinched when he pressed too close to the scar. "Hurts. Only when I breathe." "Then stop breathing." Her laughter turned into a cough, but it felt good to hear it. For a moment, they were just two medics joking in the ruins of war. When she caught her breath, her tone changed. "Do you ever ask why you're still here, Cross? After all the noise, all the blood?" He looked at her, the question landing heavier than any bullet. "Every damn day." "And what do you tell yourself?" "That maybe I can fix one more before I'm gone." She studied him for a long moment. Then softly, "Your father said the same thing." He felt his throat tighten. "You knew him well." "Better than I should have. He saved me once before the world forgot who we were. He said mercy's the hardest thing to carry because no one meddles it." Daniel swallowed hard. "I buried him with that same belief." They sat in silence, listening to the tent walls flutter. War outside, memory inside. Two people who'd seen too much and said too little. Days turned into weeks. The base shifted into routine again. Missions resumed. Rotations changed. But for Daniel, everything moved differently now. He still treated his men, still stitched and splinted, but every bandage reminded him of her, of what it meant to heal when everyone else was trying to destroy. Recovered slowly. She could walk now, though the scar on her side burned when she pushed too hard. She'd taken to helping in the med bay, cleaning instruments, filing reports, training the younger corpsmen. No one questioned her presence. There was something about her, authority born of loss, that made even seasoned soldiers step aside. The rumors grew quietly. Some said she was CIA, embedded deep. Others whispered she was the last of an old NATO ghost unit, erased from records but never from memory. Daniel didn't correct them. He just watched her move, steady, precise, haunted. She treated every wound like a confession. One evening, as the sun sank into a red horizon, Daniel found her outside the wire, staring at the mountains. He hesitated before approaching. "You shouldn't be out here alone." She didn't turn. "I've been alone longer than you've been breathing sand." He stood beside her, the two silhouettes framed by dying light. The sky looked like it was bleeding into the earth. "Tell me something," he said quietly. "Why come back? After what they did to you, why risk it again?" Her jaw tightened. "They didn't just erase my unit, Cross. They erased the idea that compassion could survive war. Falcon Cross wasn't about politics, it was about people. If I stop, then they win. And I can't let that be the last line of our story." Daniel looked down at the dirt between his boots. He understood. Not the words maybe, but the ache behind them. He felt it every time someone died on his table, every time he patched a wound just for another bullet to find it later. War was a cycle, and medics were the ones spinning its wheel with bare hands. When she finally faced him, the sunset painted her eyes in fire. "You remind me of him," she said. "Your father. The way you stare like you're apologizing to the world." He smiled faintly. He used to say every life we save buys the world one more heartbeat. "Then keep buying," she whispered. 2 weeks later, orders came down, new mission, new chaos. Extraction run near the border, intelligence sweep, quick in and out. But nothing in this desert was ever quick or clean. Daniel packed his kit in silence. He could feel her watching from the tent doorway. "You're going. Command says they need a medic on the ground." Her fingers tightened around the fabric of her sleeve. "Then take me." "You're not cleared." "I don't need clearance to save lives." "Then?" She stepped closer, eyes hard. "I know those valleys. I've been there. You'll need me." He hesitated. Part of him wanted to say yes, to have her there, to not face the darkness alone. But another part knew what she was risking. "You're still healing." "So are you." For a long moment they stared at each other, two stubborn souls cut from the same cloth of defiance. Then Daniel exhaled. "I'll bring them back," he said quietly. She nodded, though her eyes betrayed her fear. "Then bring yourself back too." The night of the mission smelled like diesel and dust. Convoy engines thrummed under the starless sky. Daniel checked his gear twice, then a third time, a ritual of superstition more than necessity. He glanced back at the base one last time. Through the darkness, he thought he saw a figure standing near the perimeter fence, small, still, watching. He didn't need the NVGs to know it was her. He raised a hand. She didn't move, just watched as the trucks rolled away. The first hour went smooth. Too smooth. They reached the canyon pass, scanned the ridge lines, found nothing. But experience had taught Daniel that silence was rarely peace. It was just the inhale before the detonation. The blast came from below. IED. The world flipped. Light, sound, fire, then darkness again. When Daniel clawed his way out of the wreck, everything was smoke and screaming metal. Men shouted for help. Rounds cracked from the hills. He crawled toward the nearest voice, dragging his med pack through sand that felt like burning glass. Blood everywhere. He rapped, pressed, moved to the next, one after another. He'd done this dance before, the frantic waltz between life and loss. Then through the chaos, a silhouette broke the smoke. Running, carrying a med kit. Hair tied back, uniform torn. He blinked, disbelief cutting through the adrenaline. She didn't answer, just dropped to her knees beside a wounded sergeant, hands moving faster than reason. She worked like she was born for it, no hesitation, no fear. Daniel yelled over the gunfire, "You're supposed to be at base." "Guess rules still don't stick," she shouted back, pressing gauze against a bleeding artery. They moved together, seamless, wordless, two medics against the storm. Every time Daniel looked up, she was already where he needed her to be. And then one sharp crack, a sniper's report. She jerked, fell. "No." He was beside her in an instant, catching her before she hit the ground. Blood spread across her vest, dark and fast. Her eyes fluttered. "Don't let it end here." "You're not dying on me, Captain." She smiled faintly, breath trembling. "You carry the cross now, Daniel. Promise me. Stay with me. Promise." He pressed his hands against the wound, but the blood wouldn't stop. Her fingers brushed his sleeve, smearing red over the medic patch. "Even when no one remembers," she whispered, "keep saving them." Then her hand fell away. For a long moment the world held still. Gunfire faded to a muffled hum. The air tasted of copper and ash. He could hear only the sound of his own heartbeat and the silence she left behind. He carried her to the bird himself, didn't speak, didn't cry, just sat beside her body as the rotors tore through the smoke. The others avoided his eyes. They'd seen men die before, but this was different. This was something sacred breaking. Back at the base, rain started to fall, a rare, stinging rain that turned the dust into mud. Daniel sat beside her empty cot, hands open, palms still stained with her blood. In his lap lay the emblem from her uniform, the white falcon, the red cross. He traced it with his thumb, then reached for his own patch. Needle, thread, slow, deliberate stitches. He sewed the falcon beside his medic cross until they were one. One bright, one faded, one promise binding the other. When the last stitch closed, he whispered, "You're remembered." Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. Inside, the tent was silent, but not empty. The weight she left behind had shape and purpose. He looked up at the flickering lamp. It swayed in the wind like a heartbeat. Sometimes, he thought, the bravest thing a soldier can do isn't fight. It's keep believing that mercy still matters. And Daniel Cross, son of a medic, heir to an erased emblem, had just sworn his life to that belief. Why do the ones who heal always leave first? The war didn't end when Rains died. It only got quieter. Too quiet. Daniel Cross still moved, still breathed, still patched men back together, but something inside him had stopped. Like a song cut mid-note. Days blurred into missions, missions into reports. He ate without tasting, slept without dreaming. But every time he looked down at his sleeve, the twin crosses stitched side by side, he remembered. The men in his unit started noticing changes. He worked longer hours, took more risks, volunteered for medevac runs others refused. "Cross, you trying to die a hero," the co barked once. Daniel just shook his head. "Trying to make her sacrifice mean something, sir." He didn't say her name anymore. He didn't need to. The patch said enough. At night, when the desert wind rattled the tin walls of the med tent, he'd sit alone with his father's old Bible, the one he'd carried since boot camp. Inside it, the photograph. A younger, standing beside his father, both smiling in a sea of rubble. The same falcon emblem bright over her heart. He'd traced the edges of that image until sleep finally dragged him under. But one night, he woke to the sound of shouting outside. Gunfire, not training, real. He grabbed his rifle and rushed out barefoot, the sand still warm beneath his feet. The sky was flashing, red flares streaking above the compound. A convoy had been hit returning from patrol. Casualties inbound. Within minutes, the med tent exploded into chaos. Blood, noise, screams, orders. Daniel moved through it all like a machine, fast, precise, merciless to hesitation. The young corpsman followed his lead, wide-eyed but steady. "Pressure dressing here. He's losing pressure." "Cross, we're out of plasma." "Then improvise." He stopped fearing death long ago. Now he only feared failure. Hours passed like seconds. By dawn, the last casualty had been stabilized. The tent reeked of antiseptic and exhaustion. Daniel stepped outside, his gloves soaked crimson. He stood there, chest heaving, watching the first light crawl over the ridge. And for a moment, he swore he saw her, standing on the hill beyond the wire. Her silhouette clear against the pale sky, hair drifting in the wind. She wasn't smiling, just watching. Then she was gone. He didn't tell anyone. Some ghosts were meant to stay unspoken. Weeks later, the base commander summoned him. "Cross," he said, sliding a file across the desk. "You've been recommended for early promotion. Commendation for bravery under fire. The brass likes your numbers." Daniel stared at the folder. He didn't open it. "Numbers don't bleed, sir." "Neither do medals, but they matter, keeps morale alive." "With respect, sir, morale doesn't patch arteries." The commander leaned back, studying him. "You've changed, Cross. Used to follow orders without questions. Now you look like a man carrying ghosts." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Maybe that's what keeps me human." He left the tent without taking the file. Outside, the wind whipped through the compound, tugging at the medic flag. Red cross, white field, bright as defiance. That night he wrote a letter, not to command, not to family, to her. "Captain Rains, I don't know if you'd approve of what I'm doing. Maybe I'm crossing lines, but the world needs people who remember you, who remember what Falcon Cross stood for. I'll make sure it isn't erased again." He sealed the letter, placed it in his Bible beside her photograph. The next morning he walked to supply, requested something unusual. "Medical kits for civilians," the quartermaster repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," Daniel said. "Blankets, gauze, antibiotics, for locals near the border villages." "That's not in your orders." "It's not in theirs to bleed, either." He signed the requisition himself. The men in logistics didn't argue. There was something in his tone that said, "Don't." And that's how it started, quietly. On his next mission, Daniel slipped off after extraction, leaving small packs of supplies hidden near the burned-out schools and shattered homes. Food, bandages, hope. The locals began to whisper about a ghost medic who appeared after battles, tending to the wounded without a flag, without payment. They called him Falcon Cross. At first, command didn't notice. Then they did. 2 months later, he was summoned again. "Cross, what the hell is this?" The co slammed a photo on the table, a grainy image of a boy clutching one of Daniel's medical packs, the Falcon Cross symbol scrawled on the wrapping. "You're running rogue ops in civilian zones." "I'm saving lives, sir." "You're risking diplomacy. The brass won't like it." "They didn't like Rains either," he said quietly. The room went still. The commander's eyes softened for just a moment. "She's gone, Cross." Daniel nodded. "That's why I have to keep her here." He tapped the patch on his arm, the twin crosses. Months passed. The fighting slowed, then flared again. But the legend of Falcon Cross spread faster than gunfire. Refugees spoke of a medic who came under cover of night, who left no name, no trace. Villagers painted the falcon on broken walls as a sign of safety. And Daniel changed. He was calmer now. The rage had cooled into purpose. He still carried his rifle, but he rarely fired it. His brothers in arms noticed the quiet in his movements, like he'd made peace with something the rest of them were still running from. One night, after a long patrol, his teammate sat beside him near the perimeter fire. "You ever think this war ends, Doc?" Daniel poked at the embers. "Wars end, people don't." "You talk like a priest." He smiled faintly. "She used to talk like that too." "She?" Captain Rains frowned, the ghost medic, the one from that Kosovo story. "She was real," Daniel said softly, "and she died saving us." Went quiet, then after a beat he asked, "What was she like?" Daniel stared into the fire. "She didn't look like a hero. She looked tired, broken, but when she worked, the world around her stopped breaking. She made silence feel safe." The flames crackled between them. For a long time, neither spoke again. By winter, Daniel had become something of a rumor himself. The brass stopped asking questions. His co stopped filing reports. Some men in the unit called him Reaper of Mercy. Others said he was cursed. But for the locals, he was the only reason they still believed Americans had hearts. Then one night, a young Afghan girl came to the base gate barefoot, clutching a torn scrap of cloth. The Falcon emblem drawn in charcoal. "Man with two crosses," she said in broken English. "He saved my brother." The guard brought her to Daniel. She couldn't have been more than 10. Her eyes were wide, fearless. She looked at him like he was something more than human, something holy. He knelt down. "What's your name?" "Your brother, is he okay?" She nodded. "He walk again because of you." She held out the scrap of cloth. "For the woman, the one who sent you." He took it slowly, his breath catching. "She told you that," he whispered. Nodded. "In dream, she say, tell him not to stop." He couldn't speak, just stared at the tiny piece of cloth, the same falcon she'd once worn, now drawn by a child's trembling hand. After she left, Daniel sat outside for hours. The stars above him were cold and endless. He thought about faith, not the kind his father preached in church, but the kind that lives in hands, in choices, in what we give instead of what we take. Maybe hadn't left. Maybe she'd just changed uniforms. By the time Daniel's deployment ended, his record was complicated. Commendations for valor, warnings for insubordination, but no one dared court-martial the man who'd saved hundreds. On his last night at the base, he packed slowly, folded his fatigues, cleaned his kit. Then, as he reached for the Bible, a folded letter slipped out, the one he'd written to her months ago. He unfolded it, added a final line. "I kept the promise." He left it on her cot. When dawn came, he walked to the helipad. The horizon was gold, the kind of morning that pretends the world isn't broken. He climbed aboard the chopper without looking back. But as the rotors spun up, something caught his eye, the medic tent below, and on its canvas wall, painted in rough white strokes, a falcon with outstretched wings. He smiled just once, then the bird lifted into the sky. Back home, the war followed him anyway. He could still smell blood in the rain, still heard gunfire and thunder, but the world was quiet now, and quiet was harder than combat. He tried hospitals, civilian clinics, nothing fit. They patched, they built, they moved on, no purpose, no heart. Then one evening, walking through an old industrial district outside San, he saw a rundown warehouse with a faded sign, "For lease." The windows were shattered, the walls cracked, but the sunlight hit it just right, turning the dust inside to gold. He stopped, looked at the patch on his sleeve. A week later, the lease was signed. He scrubbed the floors himself, painted the walls, repaired what he could, left what he couldn't. On the door, he hung a new sign. Falcon Cross Medical, Veterans and Refugee Aid. No sponsors, no headlines, just a handful of volunteers, a few old med kits, and one promise stitched in red and white. And above the entrance, framed under glass, he placed a single photograph, Rains, standing in the ruins, smiling faintly, the white falcon over her heart. He didn't say much that day, didn't pray, didn't cry. He just whispered, "We're home." What do you do with peace when you've forgotten how to hold it? For the first few months, the old warehouse stayed mostly empty. The air smelled of paint and salt from the nearby docks. A few crates of donated medical gear sat stacked against the wall, and one cot served as both bed and triage table. But Daniel Cross didn't need much. He'd lived out of tents and armored trucks. 4 walls and a roof felt like luxury. He called it Falcon Cross Medical, though there was no staff, just him and a sign that didn't even light up at night. Still, people found it. Word moved the same way it always had, in, quietly, from one wounded mouth to another. The first to knock was a Marine veteran named Tate, missing 2 fingers, haunted eyes. "You really treat vets for free?" he asked, half skeptical. Daniel nodded. "Free, the only currency that matters when pain's already been paid." Tate stared at him for a moment, then stepped inside. That was how it started. By the end of the first year, there were 20 regulars, some veterans, some refugees who'd made it through the desert crossings. all broken in different languages, all carrying the same silence. Daniel worked 12, sometimes 16 hours a day. He didn't keep a clock, he kept promises. He stitched wounds, drained infections, replaced bandages that hospitals had ignored. At night, he slept in the corner cot, the hum of the harbor mixing with memories he couldn't turn off. Sometimes, when the exhaustion blurred the edges of reality, he'd hear his voice again, soft, instructive, like she was leaning over his shoulder. Clamp lower, Cross, don't rush the knot. Pain's impatient, mercy is. He never turned around. He didn't want to break the spell. One afternoon, a young journalist walked in. Early 30s, sharp eyes, hair pulled into a knot that looked more practical than stylish. She introduced herself as Nora from the Independent Tribune. "I'm doing a feature on post-war medical outreach," she said. "Everyone in the veteran network keeps mentioning this place. Figured I'd see what the myth looks like in daylight." Daniel didn't pause his suturing. "Myth, you're looking at all of it." Nora wandered the room, camera clicking softly. The walls were lined with faded photos, children, soldiers, villagers, and at the center, the large framed picture of. "That her?" Nora asked. Daniel's hand stilled. "Captain Rains. She built the idea before I ever named it." "She military?" "Something better." Nora frowned. "There's barely anything about her online. I searched the name, no records, no service files." "There wouldn't be," he said. "They erased her." "Why?" Daniel tied off the last stitch, snipped the thread, and finally looked up. "Because she saved the wrong people." Nora didn't ask more that day, but she came back the next, and the next. Sometimes she brought supplies, sometimes just questions. She started helping with intake forms, learning how to change dressings. The clinic began to sound less like solitude and more like purpose again. At night, she'd sit opposite him as he filled out reports by lamplight. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked once. He shook his head. "I already did. The rest of me stayed out there." She studied him. "You talk about her like she's still around." He smiled faintly. "Maybe she is." Winter hit hard. The roof leaked. The donations slowed. Daniel pawned his last sidearm to buy heating oil. Still, no one was turned away. On the coldest nights, refugees slept between the exam tables, wrapped in blankets marked with the faded Falcon Cross. One evening, a man appeared at the door, tall, clean-cut, the kind of posture that screamed government. He showed a badge so quickly Daniel barely caught the lettering. "Mr. Cross," the man said, "Special Agent, Defense Intelligence. Mind if I come in?" "Already did," Daniel replied. Looked around the room, eyes pausing on his photograph. "Interesting place. You're treating foreign nationals, some undocumented. Know that." "I know they bleed the same." "That's not how Washington sees it." "Then maybe Washington needs new eyes." His expression didn't change. "We've been reviewing old NATO archives. Falcon Cross Medical Corps, ring a bell." Daniel said nothing. The unit was classified after '99. Someone been resurrecting their emblem. "You." Daniel crossed his arms. "You came all this way to tell me I'm running a charity. To ask why you're using the insignia of a defunct humanitarian task force linked to an off-the-books Kosovo incident." He took a slow breath. "Because it belonged to the only person who ever made sense of this madness." Studied him, Captain Rains. Hearing her name from that bureaucratic mouth made Daniel flinch. "You know her story." "We know fragments. She disobeyed orders, compromised an op, vanished. Official line says she died in the field." "She did die," Daniel said quietly, "saving us." "Then why keep her ghost alive?" Daniel stepped closer. "Because the world forgot what compassion looked like in uniform. She didn't." His gaze softened, just a flicker. Then he slipped a card onto the counter. "Be careful, Cross. The wrong people think legends threaten order." When he left, the card stayed untouched for weeks, collecting dust. Nora eventually coaxed the story out of him. Every piece. Kosovo, Afghanistan. The night bled out in his arms. The promise. She listened without interrupting, voice recorder silent, eyes glistening under the flicker of the lamp. When he finished, she whispered, "They won't believe it. I don't need them to. But they need to hear it." He didn't answer. A month later, the Independent Tribune published a feature titled "The Falcon Cross, The Healer's War." It wasn't sensational, it was reverent. Photos of the clinic, testimonies from soldiers and civilians. At the center, a single line. "Some heroes don't fight for victory, they fight for humanity." The story went viral overnight. Donations flooded in. Veterans from across the country showed up to volunteer. The empty warehouse became a movement. Daniel should have felt proud. Instead, he felt uneasy, because attention always came with shadows. One night while locking up, he noticed a black SUV idling across the street. Headlights off, windows tinted. The engine hummed low, patient. He stared back for a long minute until it drove away. The next morning, the clinic door was cracked open, the lock snapped. Nothing stolen, but the photo of was missing. He stood there, motionless, hands trembling. The frame's outline on the wall was a wound of its own. Nora found him later, still staring at the empty space. "We'll print another," she offered gently. "It's not the picture," he said. "It's the silence that follows when they start erasing again." She touched his arm, "Then make more noise." The clinic grew louder after that, more people, more stories, more life. Yet Daniel's nights turned restless. He'd walk the corridors long after everyone had gone, whispering to the air like a prayer. One of those nights a letter arrived, no return address, just a wax seal pressed with a falcon, inside. "To whoever carries the cross. You don't know us, but we know her." Falcon Cross was never erased, only buried. "If you want the truth, come to Prague." No signature. He read it twice, then again. His heart pounded like it did the night he found her. He could almost hear his voice. "The world will forget us, Daniel. Don't let it." He packed a small bag, left a note on the counter for Nora. "If I don't come back, keep the clinic running. The world still needs a place that believes." At dawn, he locked the door behind him and disappeared into the fog-covered harbor. The flight to Europe felt both foreign and familiar. He hadn't left American soil since deployment. But the smell of jet fuel, the vibration through the floor, those sensations stirred a part of him that had never really come home. Prague met him with gray skis and rain that tasted of metal. He found the address from the letter, an abandoned hospital near the Vltava River. Windows boarded, gate chained. But the falcon seal marked the door, faint and deliberate. Inside, dust covered everything except one corridor, footprints fresh. He followed them down a narrow hallway lit only by a single bulb. At the end, a door stood ajar. Voices whispered inside, English accented. He pushed it open. 3 people looked up. 2 men, 1 woman. Civilian clothes, but the way they stood told him they were trained. "You made it," the woman said. Her accent Eastern European, her expression guarded. "Who are you?" Daniel asked. "Falcon Cross," she said simply. "The ones they couldn't erase." His breath caught. "We've been watching your work," she continued. "Your clinic revived our symbol. Your story kept us alive. But now they know we exist again." "Who's they?" "The same governments that buried us before." One of the men stepped forward, setting a weathered folder on the table. Inside, photos, Rains, Kosovo, Afghanistan, classified reports stamped REDACTED. Daniel's throat tightened. "You kept her file." "She kept us alive," the man said. "When the program dissolved, she smuggled our records out. We've been hiding ever since, helping from the shadows. But your clinic drew attention. It's time the world sees what she died for." Daniel stared at them, heart hammering. "You want to go public?" "We want truth. but we need someone the world will listen to. Why me? Because you carry both crosses. He looked down at his sleeve. The faded threads had bled on, now fraying at the edges. He felt the weight of it, heavier than any rifle. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, "Tell me what you need." Outside, rain began to fall harder, drumming against broken glass. Lightning flared over the city, reflecting in puddles that looked like fragments of memory. Daniel stood by the window, watching the storm, feeling the past and future collide in the sound. Somewhere inside him, his voice echoed again, "Don't let it end here." He whispered to the night, "It won't." Because the Falcon Cross was no longer a ghost. It was an inheritance, one he was finally ready to claim. How much truth can a soldier bear before it becomes another kind of wound? The rain over Prague didn't stop for 3 days. It fell in cold sheets that blurred the city lights and turned the cobblestones into mirrors. Daniel Cross spent those nights in the abandoned hospital with the people who called themselves Falcon Cross, the ones who had survived the erasure. Their faces were tired but steady, the kind of calm that comes from being hunted too long to still flinch at footsteps. They spoke in low voices, often switching between languages, English, Czech, Albanian, Arabic, threaded together by a single shared vow, to heal where governments failed. The woman who led them was named. Her hair was streaked with silver, her hands rough from years of field work. She had once been deputy in Kosovo. "Your name, been on our board for months," she said, handing him a mug of black tea that tasted like smoke. "We weren't sure if you'd come." Daniel took a sip, the bitterness cutting through the damp chill. "I didn't know anyone was left to come to." Smiled faintly, "That's what they wanted." She showed him the folder he'd seen earlier. Inside were photos, grainy, time-stamped, some clearly shot under fire. One image made his stomach twist, kneeling beside a wounded child, dust swirling around her, eyes blazing. The caption read, "Falcon Cross Operation 1999. They called it humanitarian, said. It became a massacre." Daniel looked up. "I thought she disobeyed orders." She followed them until she saw what those orders meant. The unit was supposed to pull out after an intelligence sweep, but there were civilians, families. She refused to abandon them. Command accused her of betrayal. We tried to defend her. They scrubbed us all. Her voice trembled on the last word. Daniel ran his thumb over the photo, tracing the faint outline of the Falcon emblem. So she spent the rest of her life saving people who never knew her name. "And you're doing the same," said softly. "You just don't know what it will cost yet." They talked for hours, about the missions they'd continued in secret, smuggling medical supplies into under fake NGOs, training field medics in refugee corridors, hiding from governments that preferred their silence. Every operation left a scar on the map: Aleppo, Mosul, Donetsk, Yemen. "Everywhere we went," one of the men said, "we saw her ghost first, always her." Daniel nodded. "She never left any of us." Opened a drawer and slid a small metal case toward him. Inside lay a data drive sealed in waterproof plastic. "Before she died, sent us this. We couldn't decrypt it, but your name is in the file directory." "My name?" "She must have added it later when she met you." Daniel stared at the drive like it might burn him. "What's on it?" "Records, orders, proof of what really happened. The reason Falcon Cross was erased." The room fell silent. Outside, thunder rolled over the river. "If this goes public," said quietly, "it won't just clear her name. It'll tear down half that they built around those wars." Daniel's pulse quickened. He'd spent years trying to build something out of mercy. This was a weapon. "You're asking me to finish her fight." Met his eyes. "No, we're asking you to decide if it should be finished." That night he couldn't sleep. He sat by the cracked window, the drive glinting on the table beside him. Every raindrop against the glass sounded like a heartbeat. He thought about her voice, her laugh, the way she'd looked at him through the smoke that day. "You carry the cross now, Daniel, promise me." Was this what she meant? To expose the truth no matter the fallout, or to keep saving quietly without turning mercy into vengeance? He didn't know. All he knew was that peace had never come easy to people like them. By dawn, he'd made a decision. He carried the drive across the river to a small cyber that opened before sunrise. The clerk barely looked up. Daniel rented a terminal, plugged it in, and began the process of breaking the encryption. Lines of code flickered on the screen, scrolling like falling rain. And then the files opened. Photos, reports, transcripts, the truth. He read them slowly, each line heavier than the last. Falcon Cross hadn't failed in Kosovo. They'd been sacrificed. A drone strike authorized by Allied command, meant to erase evidence of civilian casualties, had wiped out half their team. The survivors were silenced, their service records sealed under false charges of insubordination. Had spent the next 2 decades trying to expose it, building new operations under different names, saving the people her government had abandoned. And when she showed up in Afghanistan, she wasn't lost. She was chasing the trail of that same cover-up. Daniel leaned back, breath shallow. His father's voice echoed faintly in memory. "Son, there are wars no metal can win." He the files to a secure drive, then deleted the logs. When he stepped outside, the sun had broken through the clouds for the first time in days. The light felt foreign. He found waiting by the bridge. "You saw it," she said. "I saw everything." "Then you know what we've lived with." He nodded, "And what she died for." Studied him, "So what now?" Daniel looked out over the Vltava River. The current shimmered like molten glass. "Now I figure out how to tell the world without turning it to ash." Back in the States, Nora was waiting. When he walked through the clinic doors again, she nearly dropped the box of supplies in her hands. "Jesus, Daniel, you disappeared for 2 weeks. No calls, no." "I had to finish something." He handed her the drive. She frowned. "What is this?" Her story, the real one. They sat for hours going through the files. Nora read in silence, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock to fury. "They called this humanitarian aid," she whispered. "They called it cleanup." When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "If we publish this, if it's real, do you understand what happens? It'll make enemies you can't see coming." He nodded. "I've already met them." "And if they come again?" He smiled faintly. "Then they'll find we're harder to erase this time." Nora closed the laptop. "Then we do it right, carefully, documented, no leaks until it's airtight." She leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You know, you could chosen a quiet life." Daniel looked around the clinic, the worn cots, the faded walls, the photo of that they'd reprinted and hung back in its place. "I did. This is what quiet looks like for people like us." The following weeks blurred into movement. Nora cross-checked sources, records. Daniel reached out to a few trusted veterans, men who'd been in Kosovo, who remembered whispers about the medics that wouldn't die. One by one, they confirmed the fragments. Falcon Cross had existed. Falcon Cross had been silenced. Falcon Cross deserved to rise again. But as the truth built momentum, shadows followed. Unmarked cars parked too long near the clinic. Unknown numbers called and hung up. Once, someone left a single white feather taped to the door, clean, perfect, untouched by rain. Daniel stared at it for a long time, then smiled. "Guess we're not alone anymore." The night before the story went live, he stood on the roof of the clinic, watching the city lights flicker through a low fog. Nora joined him, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You ready for this?" she asked. "Doesn't matter if I am." She handed him a mug, "Would be proud." He looked down at the steam rising between them. Tell me to stop making it about pride." They stood there in silence for a while, listening to the distant hum of the highway. Somewhere below, a siren wailed, a sound both familiar and endless. Do you ever think she knew how much she changed you? Nora asked softly. Daniel smiled faintly. She didn't change me. She reminded me who I was supposed to be. He glanced up at the sky, where faint stars pressed through the haze. Tomorrow, people will know her name again. And yours. Doesn't matter, he sipped his coffee, as long as they remember what the cross meant. At dawn, the Independent Tribune released the Operation, the hidden truth behind Falcon Cross. Within hours, the story spread worldwide. Networks picked it up, governments it, veterans confirmed it. The symbol of the white falcon over the red cross appeared everywhere, on signs, on social feeds, on murals painted by strangers. Some called it propaganda, others called it justice. Daniel called it finally breathing. By nightfall, reporters crowded the street outside the clinic. Cameras flashed through the glass. Nora handled them with practiced calm, offering statements, protecting names. Daniel stayed inside, tending to a patient with a shrapnel scar that refused to heal. The cameras didn't need to see this part. The real work was quiet. When he finished, he stepped into the hallway and froze. There, leaning against the doorframe, was. "You made it," he said, surprised. "So did you," she replied. "The world's talking. Maybe it's time Falcon Cross stops hiding." He gestured around the room. "We already did." She handed him something, a small wooden box. Inside, a silver badge inlaid with the falcon emblem. "It was hers," said. "She told me once if he ever finds me, give him this." Daniel turned it over in his palm. The edges were worn smooth from years of wear. On the back, engraved words barely visible, "Mercy is our weapon." He swallowed hard. "She planned this, didn't she?" Smiled sadly. "She always planned farther than any of us." They stood together, watching the light spill through the window, dust motes glowing like sparks. "Now what?" Daniel asked. "Now," said, "we keep healing." That night, long after the last reporter had gone, Daniel sat alone in the darkened clinic. The badge lay on the table beside him. He traced the engraving with one finger, then reached for his sleeve. The patch was fraying, threads pulling loose from months of wear. He lifted the needle again, like a ritual, and began to stitch the new badge directly beneath it. Each pierce of the needle whispered her name. When he finished, he leaned back, exhausted but calm. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft this time, not like sorrow but like cleansing. He closed his eyes. And somewhere between the thunder and the heartbeat, he could almost hear her voice again, steady, quiet, eternal. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, Daniel. It simply acts." He smiled. The world outside might still be broken, but Falcon Cross was alive again, reborn not through war, but through the quiet courage to heal. And for the first time in years, Daniel Cross felt whole. How long can the truth survive before someone tries to bury it again? It had been 2 months since the name Falcon Cross had gone from a forgotten ghost to a global headline. At first, the world reacted the way it always does, with awe, anger, confusion. Politicians called for investigations, veterans posted their own stories, and journalists swarmed the ruins of forgotten, searching for proof of the healers that history erased. For the first time, Daniel Cross's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Interview requests, invitations, awards, he ignored them all. Because for him, the mission wasn't finished. It had only shifted form. The clinic had become a refuge and a storm shelter. The number of patients tripled overnight. Volunteers came from across the country, medics, ex-soldiers, nurses, even civilians who just wanted to help. The walls still smelled of antiseptic and salt air, but the sound was different now. Laughter mixed with pain. Hope coexisted with exhaustion. Nora turned one of the side rooms into an office, papers stacked ceiling high. She'd become the anchor of it all, taking calls, organizing shipments, shielding Daniel from the noise he didn't want. But she could see it in him, the unease. the same quiet dissonance that had followed him since the war. One evening, while they closed up the clinic, she asked the question she'd been holding for weeks. "Do you regret it?" Daniel didn't look up from the supply ledger. What part? Making her story public, the exposure, the politics, everything. He was silent for a moment. Then he said softly, "Regret isn't the right word, it's weight. You don't regret carrying it, you just wish someone else could for a while." Nora leaned against the counter. "You sound like you're still waiting for something to go wrong." He met her gaze. "Because I am." It didn't take long for that feeling to prove true. A week later, a military convoy stopped outside the clinic. The lead Humvee bore a flag Daniel recognized too well: NATO Medical Command. Out stepped 3 officers and a man in a black coat. The air outside was crisp, but their expressions were colder. "Mr. Cross," the man in the coat said, "you've attracted quite the audience." "Depends who's watching," Daniel replied. The man smiled without warmth. "We'll call them interested parties. You've reopened old wounds, son. The kind of wounds governments like to forget exist." Daniel's jaw clenched. Then maybe they shouldn't have caused them. The officer beside the man shifted uneasily. "We're not here to argue history. We're here to prevent it from repeating. Falcon Cross isn't authorized to operate under its original charter." "Then write a new one." The man's eyes narrowed. "You think it's that simple? You're walking a dangerous line between humanitarian aid and political provocation." Daniel stepped closer, his voice calm but sharp. "If saving people is dangerous, maybe you're standing on the wrong side of the line." For a moment, no one spoke. The wind rustled the flag above them, its red cross fluttering like an accusation. Finally, the man turned away. "Be careful, Mr. Cross. Heroes make great symbols. They also make convenient scapegoats." The convoy left without another word, but the warning stayed long after the dust settled. That night, Daniel sat in the clinic's back room, staring at the old photograph of. "Why does it never end?" he whispered. The silence answered like a sigh. He reached into his pocket, pulled out her silver badge, and set it on the table. The engraved words, "Mercy is our weapon," glinted in the lamplight. He promised her to keep saving lives. But what if keeping that promise meant drawing more fire onto the people he was trying to protect? For the first time since the war, Daniel felt torn between 2 kinds of duty, the one to truth and the one to life. Over the next few weeks, Falcon Cross expanded faster than anyone could have predicted. Humanitarian groups reached out from every continent. Veterans volunteered to deploy again, not with rifles, but with med kits. Someone painted the Falcon emblem on a crumbling hospital in Aleppo, another on a refugee tent in Sudan. The symbol was spreading faster than control. And with every new story, Daniel's inbox filled with messages. Some were from soldiers thanking him for giving meaning to their scars. Others were threats, veiled or otherwise. Then came the message that made his breath stop. It was a video sent from an encrypted source. The feed was shaky, low resolution. In it, a young medic crouched beside a wounded child somewhere in a bombed-out village. The medic wore no flag, only the Falcon Cross emblem stitched crudely on his shoulder. "We're running low on supplies," the medic said, his voice trembling. "They're targeting clinics with the mark, 'We need help.' They think we're spies." The feed cut out. Nora found Daniel staring at the frozen image on the screen. "Where was this?" she asked. He shook his head. "Coordinates are masked, somewhere in Syria maybe, or Yemen." "Daniel, if they're being targeted." "I have to go." "Absolutely not," she snapped. "You've done your part, you've built something worth keeping. You can't just walk into another." He turned toward her, voice low but steady. "I can't ask others to wear that emblem if I won't stand beside them when it burns." Nora's anger broke into grief. "And if you don't come back?" He smiled faintly. "Then maybe someone else will carry the cross." Within 48 hours, he was on a cargo plane heading east. The mission wasn't official. Falcon Cross had no chain of command, no funding, no sanction. Just a name, a symbol, and a handful of coordinates whispered across encrypted channels. He landed near a border town barely holding itself together. The air was thick with smoke and the metallic taste of old artillery. He found the field clinic in the ruins of an old schoolhouse, 2 tents, a generator, a dozen wounded. When he stepped through the flap, the young medic from the video looked up, disbelief flooding his face. "You're Daniel Cross," he said, "just another medic." The kid smiled weakly. "You came. You called." Together they worked through the night. No uniforms, no sides, just patience. Children burned by shrapnel, a soldier who tried to carry his brother too far, a mother with a newborn wrapped in torn cloth. Daniel's hands moved on instinct. Every stitch, every bandage, every breath counted. He forgot the cameras, the politics, the headlines. It was just medicine and mercy again, the way had taught him. But mercy attracts fire. Just before dawn, the first mortar struck. The blast threw him off his feet, dust choking the air. Screams tore through the tent. The generator flickered, died. Daniel crawled toward the fallen medic, pulling him out from under debris. "Are you hit?" "No," the kid gasped, "but they're coming back." Daniel scanned the horizon. Shadows moved through the smoke, armed men, silhouettes against firelight. He grabbed the medic's shoulder. "Get everyone out the back. Move the wounded first." "What about you?" "I'll cover." He found his rifle where it had fallen, slung it across his shoulder, but didn't fire. Instead, he ran to the edge of the camp, waving his arms, shouting in the local dialect. "There are no soldiers here, just wounded, just medics." The figures hesitated. Another explosion shattered the air. He fell hard, ears ringing, world spinning. When the dust cleared, the attackers were gone, retreating. "Silence." He turned. The tents were in flames, the generator gone, half the supplies burning. But they'd made it, most of them. The wounded were safe behind the ridge. The medic kid was alive, hands trembling, eyes wide. Daniel stood in the ashes, breathing hard, and for a moment he thought he saw her again, standing at the edge of the firelight, same calm posture, same faint smile. He closed his eyes, whispered, "I kept the promise." By the time rescue teams arrived, he was barely conscious. Concussion, fractured ribs, smoke inhalation. They airlifted him to a NATO field hospital across the border. When he woke, Nora was there. Her eyes were red. "You're insane," she said quietly. "You almost died again." "I know." "And for what?" He looked out the window at the rising sun. "For proof that mercy still stands in the fire." She didn't argue, just sat beside him, holding his hand in silence. Later that night, she pulled out her phone. "You should see this," she said. The world had seen the attack. Someone had uploaded footage from a drone. The burning Falcon Cross tents, the medics pulling wounded civilians to safety. Social media exploded with outrage. Donations, protests, calls for ceasefire zones for medical workers. The symbol had become more than a story now. It was a movement. Daniel stared at the screen. Faces from every continent, people painting the Falcon emblem on walls, on jackets, on makeshift clinics. He whispered, "She'd hate the attention." Nora smiled faintly. "Maybe, but she'd love what it means." He looked down at his sleeve, at the patch burned at the edges but still intact. The white falcon, the red cross, faded, charred, but unbroken. Sometimes survival isn't about escaping the fire. It's about carrying the flame forward. And Daniel Cross, battered but breathing, realized something had always known. You don't end war by fighting harder. You end it by refusing to stop healing. When does mercy become rebellion? The headlines had barely cooled when the backlash began. Governments that had praised Falcon Cross 2 weeks earlier now called for regulation of unsanctioned medical interventions. The same voices that had quoted Raines's courage were drafting papers to contain it. Daniel Cross watched it unfold from a hospital bed that still smelled of smoke. His ribs were bound tight. His lungs burned every time he breathed too deep, but he stayed awake through the nights, reading the news in silence. Across the world, the white falcon had become more than a mark of healing. It had become a mirror. Every country saw something different in it: defiance, compassion, guilt. Some called it a humanitarian uprising. Others whispered the word insurgency. Nora tried to keep the clinic afloat under the noise. Donations poured in, but so did scrutiny. Cameras camped outside again, reporters shouting questions Daniel refused to answer. "Daniel," she said one night, exhausted, "they're turning this into politics. You can't fight governments with gauze and goodwill." He looked up from the cot where a refugee child slept, an oxygen mask fogging gently with each breath. "I'm not fighting," he said softly. "I'm treating the fallout." A week after he was discharged, the first hearing notice arrived, an official summons from the International Security Council. They wanted him to testify about Falcon Cross's unauthorized operations inactive. Nora slammed the letter onto his desk. "They're not inviting you to talk, they're inviting you to take the blame." "I know." "Then why even go?" "Because never got to speak for herself." He signed the form. The hearing was held in Geneva, inside a glass building that looked like it had never seen dust. Rows of cameras lined the entrance. Protesters filled the square outside, some waving flags with the Falcon emblem, others with banners calling him a traitor. Inside, the air was sharp with cold air conditioning and quiet hostility. "Mr. Cross," began one of the chairmen, "are you aware that your organization's actions have interfered with multiple sovereign operations?" Daniel sat straight, hands folded. "We've interfered only with suffering, sir." A murmur rippled through the room. The chairman adjusted his glasses. "That's poetic, but not an answer." "It's the only one that matters." They grilled him for hours: dates, missions, affiliations. Every question came shaped like a trap. He kept his voice steady, his tone even. When they accused Falcon Cross of harboring enemy combatants, he replied, "We don't ask for allegiances, only blood type." When they asked who funded them, he said, "People who still believe compassion shouldn't need clearance codes." By the end, the panel looked less like accusers and more like men realizing they were arguing against something they'd already lost. A single question closed the session. "Mr. Cross, do you consider yourself a soldier or an activist?" He paused, then said, "Neither. I'm a reminder of what both were supposed to protect." The room went silent, cameras clicked, the hearing adjourned. The following morning, the clip went viral. His calm defiance played across screens worldwide. Commentators argued over his motives, generals called him reckless, doctors called him necessary. Falcon Cross clinics began appearing everywhere. Makeshift tents in bomb neighborhoods, volunteer groups using the emblem without permission, medics sending videos of children recovering under the Falcon banner. But for every act of hope, there was a backlash. Convoys were ambushed, supplies seized. Some volunteers disappeared without word. And in the middle of it all, Daniel Cross became the name everyone wanted, either to celebrate or to silence. Nora begged him to stay out of sight. "They're hunting the symbol now," she warned. He shook his head. "Symbols don't bleed, people do." The clinic in San had grown into a network. Rooms once filled with echoes now buzzed with life. Volunteers sorting donations, veterans teaching trauma care, translators on phones coordinating shipments across borders. But Daniel rarely stayed inside anymore. He moved quietly, traveling from site to site, checking on field teams, refusing protection. "The cross goes where the wounded are," he told Nora. Every trip took more out of him. His old injuries ached in cold weather, his hands trembled after long surgeries, but he ignored it. One evening, as he returned from a refugee corridor in Turkey, he found Nora waiting at the door with a letter in hand. "From Geneva," she said. "They've suspended your travel clearance." He smiled faintly. "Guess I'll just stop using airports." "I'm serious, Daniel. They'll arrest you next time." "Then they'll have to stitch me up first." She stepped closer, eyes sharp with anger and fear. "You can't keep carrying this alone." He looked past her toward the wall where his photograph hung. "I'm not." Later that night, when the clinic was quiet, he walked the empty hallway, running his fingers along the walls. Each door had a nameplate now: volunteers, medics, translators. Lives rebuilt around a promise he hadn't meant to start. He reached the end of the corridor, where a small storage room had been turned into a memorial. On the wall were dozens of photos. The first medics lost in the new clinics, children who'd lived because someone refused to stop helping. He stood there for a long time, then he whispered, "What do I do now?" And for the first time since the war, he felt an answer, not words, just a quiet certainty that the mission wasn't his anymore. It belonged to all of them. A month later, he vanished from public view. Nora told reporters he was on medical leave. But inside she knew the truth. He'd gone underground, traveling with aid convoys that crossed lines no government acknowledged. She kept the clinic alive, though, and every few weeks an unmarked envelope would arrive. Maps, handwritten notes, photos of children smiling beside field tents painted with the Falcon. No signature, just the initials ER scratched in the corner. At first she thought it was a coincidence. Then one night she noticed something. Every map corresponded to an old Falcon Cross site from Raines's records. The legacy wasn't dying. It was reorganizing quietly, invisibly. One evening, as she was closing up, a stranger appeared at the door. A young woman in dusty fatigues, maybe 25, carrying a satchel marked with the Falcon emblem. "You Nora?" she asked. Nora nodded. The woman smiled faintly. "He said you'd know what to do with this." She handed over a small metal box. The same kind had once used to store field drives. Inside was a folded letter in Daniel's handwriting. "Nora, if you're reading this, it means the work has to go on without me for a while. Don't look for me. Every life you save is where I'll be. Tell them the cross belongs to no one now. It belongs to everyone who still believes mercy is stronger than fear." There was no date, no location, only a final line that made her throat tighten. "Give this to whoever asks why we keep doing it." Beneath the note was the silver badge, his. Weeks turned into months. Falcon Cross continued, decentralized, nameless. The emblem became a global shorthand for hope. Some said Daniel Cross had been arrested. Others said he died in the field. Nora never confirmed either story. She just kept the clinic doors open and the lights burning through the night. Sometimes, during the quiet hours before dawn, she'd catch a glimpse of movement outside. A man walking past in a hooded coat, limping slightly, a glint of metal on his arm. She never called out. Because some people were meant to remain ghosts. Far away, somewhere between two borders no map agreed on, Daniel Cross moved with a convoy of volunteers. The trucks were painted white, the Falcon symbol hand-drawn in black ink. He rode in the back, checking supplies, his breath visible in the cold night air. When they reached the village, he climbed down, his body aching but steady. Children peeked from doorways, the wounded waited on makeshift stretchers. He smiled gently. "All right," he murmured, "let's get to work." The team unfolded tables, unpacked kits, lit lanterns. The glow spread through the ruins like dawn arriving early. A boy tugged his sleeve. "Are you the Falcon man?" Daniel laughed softly. "No, the Falcon's all of us." As he turned to help the next patient, The wind caught his coat and lifted it just enough to reveal the edge of a faded patch, the white falcon over the red cross. The child's eyes widened, and for a heartbeat the whole world seemed to pause, like it recognized itself again. Later that night, after the fires dimmed and the patients slept, Daniel sat on a rock overlooking the valley. He pulled a small recorder from his pocket, the same kind had once used for field notes. He clicked it on. "This is Daniel Cross," he said quietly. "Falcon Cross lives, not as an organization, as an idea. Wherever someone chooses to save instead of shoot, she's there. We're all carrying the cross now." He clicked it off, placed it beside the badge he wore, and looked up at the stars. The sky above him was clear for the first time in months. No drones, no flares, just silence, the kind that feels earned. He closed his eyes, hearing her voice again, steady, familiar, eternal. "Don't let it end here." He smiled. "It won't." And somewhere far across the sleeping earth, the symbol of the white falcon shimmered on walls, tents, and hearts, alive, defiant, and still healing. How does a promise outlive the person who made it? The wind came down from the mountains that morning, carrying dust and the faint scent of rain that never seemed to fall. The convoy was gone, moved on to another camp deeper in the valley, but Daniel Cross stayed behind. He'd volunteered to remain with the last few patients until they recovered enough to travel. He liked the quiet. He liked the in-between. The little village had no name on maps, just a cluster of clay houses and a well that groaned when the rope turned. But for the people who'd survived here, it was the center of their universe. The Falcon Cross banner hung from an old radio antenna, rippling in the wind, white falcon, red cross, edges burned from a dozen rescues. Daniel stood outside the tent, watching sunlight creep across the horizon. His body was worn thin, he knew it, but every ache felt earned. Years of dust had turned the lines on his face into something weathered but purposeful. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He wasn't a medic with a rank or a file. He was just a man with a needle, a promise, and a ghost that still guided his hands. That afternoon, he visited a boy named Sami, the same boy who'd called him Falcon Man. The child's leg was healing, but his spirit was stronger than the bone ever would be. "Will you leave again?" Sami asked. "Someday," Daniel said. "Then who will fix us when you go?" Daniel smiled faintly. "You will." "Me." "Anyone who chooses to help someone else carries the falcon. That's the rule." The boy thought for a long moment, then nodded with the solemnity only children possess. When Daniel stepped outside, the wind picked up again, swirling the dust into tiny spirals that rose and vanished. He looked up toward the ridge line, where the mountains met the sky. In that shimmer of heat and haze, he thought he saw her again, Rains, standing with the calm of someone who'd already forgiven the world. He blinked, the vision faded, but the peace stayed. That night the volunteers lit a small fire behind the tents. They shared canned food, laughter, and stories that softened the silence. One of the younger medics, a woman from Nairobi named, handed Daniel a tin cup of tea. "Tell us how it started," she said. He chuckled. "You already know the story." "Not from you." He hesitated, staring into the flames. The firelight flickered across their faces, faces too young to carry so much courage. "It started with a storm," he said finally, "and a woman I thought was an enemy. She wore this emblem, bleeding and half buried in the sand. I saved her, but really, she saved me." The group fell quiet. The crackle of the fire filled the spaces between words. "She taught me that saving one life isn't small. It's infinite. Every person you pull from the edge carries 100 others with them. That's how you fight a war that never ends. You heal faster than the world can break." When he finished, wiped her eyes and smiled. "Then we keep healing." Daniel nodded. "Always." Hours later, when the camp slept, he sat alone with his field journal. Pages filled with names, coordinates, sketches of bandage techniques, fragments of prayers in languages he'd picked up along the way. On the last page he wrote slowly, "Falcon Cross is not mine. It belongs to those who still kneel beside the fallen instead of stepping over them." He signed it, closed the notebook, and set it atop his pack. Outside, lightning flashed far off beyond the hills. A storm was coming. He could smell it, the kind that scrubbed the sky clean. He smiled to himself. Had always said storms were the earth's way of remembering. He lay back on the cot, hands folded over his chest, and listened to the thunder roll closer. When Nora received the transmission 2 weeks later, she was standing in the sand clinic, sorting medical shipments. The file arrived without sender ID, just a timestamp and coordinates. She opened it, and Daniel's voice filled the room, rough but steady. "This is Daniel Cross, Falcon Cross field log, maybe the last one. The clinics are growing faster than we ever dreamed. They don't need me anymore, and that's how I know it's working. If I don't make it back, don't waste time mourning. Keep the lights on. Keep the doors open. Mercy doesn't stop when one hand lets go, it passes to the next. Tell them the falcon flies because everyone carries a piece of its wings." The message ended in static. Nora stood motionless, eyes wet. Around her, volunteers worked, phones rang, patients laughed down the hall. Life kept moving, the kind of proof Daniel would have called a victory. She wiped her face, straightened, and whispered, "We'll keep flying." Weeks later, satellite news showed footage of a village on fire near the border where Daniel had been last heard. Then came reports of a rescue convoy that had saved hundreds before disappearing into the mountains. No names, no survivors confirmed. But among the debris found later by a UN inspection team was a single patch, white falcon over a red cross, singed, but still whole. They sent it to the clinic in San. Nora framed it and placed it on the wall beside photograph. Below it, she hung a small plaque engraved with the words Daniel had once said in that Geneva courtroom. "We don't ask for allegiance, only blood type." It became the clinic's motto. Years passed. The wars changed names but never nature. Yet wherever bombs fell, the falcon appeared, on armbands, on tents, on makeshift hospitals hidden in ruins. The original Falcon Cross network dissolved into thousands of smaller groups, each carrying its spirit. And in every rumor, in every whisper, people still spoke of him, the medic who never stopped walking. Some said he died in the mountains. Others swore they saw him in new, older, slower, still carrying the emblem stitched to his sleeve. No one ever proved either story. One evening, decades later, an old veteran visited the sand clinic. His hair was white, his voice cracked with time. He told the receptionist he was looking for the woman who ran the place. Nora came out, older too, but steady as ever. "You knew a man named Daniel Cross," the veteran said. "Yes," she answered softly. "I served in Iraq, got hit bad, woke up in a field tent, American medic patch but different emblem. He fixed me, said his name didn't matter, gave me this." The man pulled out a small metal badge, silver falcon, tarnished but intact. Nora took it with shaking hands. "Where did you get it?" "He said to pass it on, when I met someone still helping people for no reason at all." She smiled through tears. "Then you've done your part." The man nodded, left quietly. She stood there for a long time, staring at the badge, the light catching its worn edges. Then she placed it beside the framed patch on the wall, two relics side by side, the beginning and the continuation. That night, as the clinic lights dimmed and the city outside hushed, Nora walked through the empty halls. Every bed was occupied, every patient breathing, every monitor blinking softly. She paused beneath the wall of photos, Daniel, the countless faces that had carried the emblem forward. In the stillness, she spoke aloud to no one in particular. "You kept your promise, Daniel. The world remembers." Outside, a wind swept in from the sea, rattling the clinic's old sign. The falcon emblem swayed, casting its shadow across the door like wings opening once more. And for a moment, just a fleeting second, she thought she heard two voices layered in the wind, one warm and tired, one calm and resolute. Keep saving them, even when no one remembers. The voices faded into the rhythm of the waves. Years later, when a child born long after the wars asked where the Falcon Cross came from, Nora's successor pointed to the wall. That symbol, she said, belongs to everyone who chooses compassion over fear. It began with two medics who refused to stop saving people, even when the world tried to forget them. The child tilted her head. Are they still alive? The woman smiled. In every life we save, yes. Across the world, in a mountain village rebuilt from ashes, an old man walked slowly between the rows of wildflowers that had grown where the tents once stood. His beard was gray now, his hands unsteady, but the patch on his sleeve was still there. White falcon, red cross. He knelt, placed a small field medal in the soil, and whispered, "For all of you." The wind rustled through the flowers, bending them like they were bowing. He looked toward the horizon, eyes bright despite the years. There was no audience, no music, no ceremony, just the quiet dignity of a man who'd kept a promise longer than anyone expected. He smiled once softly, the kind of smile that forgives the world. And as the last light of day touched the mountains, the camera of history pulled back, showing a single emblem fluttering in the wind, surrounded by fields of color born from ground once by fire. Because sometimes, legacy isn't carved into monuments or medals. Sometimes it breathes quietly through the hands that still reach for the wounded. And somewhere, far beyond words or wars, the echo of Rains's voice endures. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.